So I'm really sick right now, but I gotta add in this portion to ask some clarification about this video. I made this video about 2 weeks ago. It was a little bit before the whole fiasco with the Chinese Nikke stuff. I sat on this for a while, mainly because I knew this is going to be a contentious topic, and I kind of don't feel like starting stuff, you know? However, after talking about it on stream, there's actually a lot of people within my community who are interested in hearing about my critiques on Nikke's storyline. So I'm going to be brave here and decide to release this video. I just want to say ahead of time, Nikke is still one of those games where I love to death, and just because I'm critiquing something, it doesn't mean that I hate it. I know for some people that doesn't correlate in their heads. It's something that they literally cannot comprehend. But I know myself more than other people know me, and I have to be confident in myself. I know that sounds dramatic, but you know how people are sometimes. Anyway, let's just get to the video and hope you enjoy it. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Viewers who knew me from 2024 would know that I made a simple video called Why I Will Always Love Nikke. As time moves forward, that video only becomes more true for me. So I'm sure you're asking at this point, if you love Nikke so much, why is this video about criticizing the story? The one thing you should not do in this community. Well, to be honest, in the aforementioned video, I said this. Don't get me wrong, there are negatives about Nikke. I have plenty of them, actually. But this is not a review. I'm not here to talk shit about my favorite gacha game. So Pyrus reacted to this video, and he told me that he wanted to hear the criticisms. I would pull the clip, but Twitch obliterated a lot of VODs lately, so you're gonna have to settle for a trust me bro on this one. Anyway, Pyrus, you adorable succubus you, this one's for you. I'm not going to go into every criticism I have. If I did, this video would literally be over an hour. So I'll keep this focus on the most egregious ones I know. Also, I will be referencing Ghost Frontline a lot in this video. I have a lot of Ghost Frontline viewers, so I feel comfortable making that comparison. Also, spoilers for both games. So post-edit here at Mystic here, it has come to my attention that it has become a trend to criticize the latest chapters as well as the 2.5 anniversary event. Primarily because they actually are extremely mediocre, and I do agree with that. The main point here, though, is that people have been saying that there has been a noticeable drop in quality for the writing for a while now, but I actually disagree with that. These issues has always been prevalent. It just hasn't been as pronounced as they are right now. The big issue that people are having is that they latch very hard onto the early events that were an outlier. So, for instance, Overzone. Overzone is often regarded as the best story that Nikke has ever provided. And then there's also Chapter 0 and Chapter 1 as well. These early chapters have essentially carried the emotional weight of the rest of the story, and this has allowed people, including myself, to passively forgive all of the logical issues that the story has. The only new thing that has been a problem is the pacing. Thanks to the pacing being so bad, it has allowed people to actually see what is going on with the rest of the story. But even with the pacing issues, that has also been a thing in the past. It just wasn't as pronounced as it is now. I feel like whenever I script things, I tend to not straight up say what the actual problem is or what my actual thesis is. So I'm putting it here right now. The big thing here is that the story has a lot of ups and downs, which means that it's very inconsistent and it can make things difficult to point out unless you're actually very keen on these things. You can say this video is going to make a case that these issues have always been present, and it's not just with the latest chapters or the latest event. Anyway, back to the video. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's first talk about what made Nikke's story so beloved in the community. Gacha games tend to have a terrible narrative at the start for one reason or another. Even Ghost Frontline 1 is like this. Nikke does not have this problem. Despite being in a post-apocalyptic world, the overall tone of the main cast during the time is one of an action comedy. You have your three main girls, and one of them is portrayed as your main love interest. This is, unironically, standard stuff for a gacha game. There's always going to be a wife character that the narrative wants you to emotionally invest in. What usually doesn't happen is the wife dies, and this sets the tone for the entire game. This is a rug pull. It gives you a false sense of security, and if you fall for it, the emotional resonance is substantial. This even goes beyond the narrative itself. Advertisements of this game clearly made it known that they were proud of being called the ass jiggle game, and it was made for the most cultured of gamers. But if you were looking at trailers before the game's launch, it was clear that the game was taking itself a lot more seriously than one would expect. This is the initiation phase. Look past the degeneracy. Look beyond the ass physics. Care about the world that these characters are living in, and fight to make it better, so you never have to feel what you felt in Chapter 0 ever again. Now, here's my premise. I would argue Nikke has a Honkai Star Rail problem. If you ever played Honkai Star Rail, you would know that the best part of the game, for most people, is the beginning. The Belobog arc is peak storytelling. But after that point, the game's narrative fails to capture that essence ever again. Nikke has a similar problem, but this one is more volatile, primarily because Nikke is banking really hard on you being emotionally invested. If Marian's death doesn't grab you, then the Overzone event will. If somehow Overzone fails to tug at your heartstrings, there's the Red Ash event, and then Old Tales. And let's not forget about Walk Run. I'm very confident to say that Nikke are masters at character writing, probably even better than Ghost Frontline if I'm honest. But there's a lot of ways where the writing just sucks, and easily one of the worst aspects of Nikke's writing is its logical consistency, or lack thereof. The lowest hanging fruit here is Nymph. Nymph is the most awfully written plot device in the entire story. There's a lot of rules regarding Nymph, but there are two core aspects of it. The first is that it grants a Nikke practical immortality, and the second is that it heavily limits a Nikke. Not only does it control a Nikke's emotions, but it also stops a Nikke from attacking anything that is deemed friendly, which is usually humans and other Nikkes. Nymph is also required in order for a Nikke to become corrupt. All three of these rules have been broken, to the point where the story had to eventually retcon that Nymph was faulty and inconsistent, so they could excuse past and future inconsistencies. Here is a short list of inconsistencies regarding Nymph. In Chapter 13, Marian was restored when the commander's blood splashed on her. This got rid of her Nymph, but Chatterbox corrupted her again, and the corruption went to her brain. The only way this could be fixed is with a full mind wipe. This is the only case where this happened, but I don't think people realize just how much of Pandora's box was opened when this happened. Even if we accept that corrupting Marian again is fine, which it is not, we have another character that doesn't have any Nymph, Rappy. In Chapter 11, Rappy and Matisse are struck by tentacles that injected them with corruption. Matisse was corrupted, Rappy was not. If we apply the same logic that happened with Chatterbox, Rappy should have fell into the same state Marian did. The common counter-argument against this is Marian still had Nymph, as she was splashed by the commander's blood, and was not shot with a Bobhouse bullet. But this is completely wrong. While Ingrid did not understand the situation with the commander's blood, she straight up says Nymph was completely gone and the corruption went straight to her brain. The lack of a Nymph makes it so that she could not be controlled by the Raptures, leaving her in a vegetative state. Second point. One of the most egregious examples is the Inhibitor, which you can consider the cousin of Nymph. For a very short time, Nymph and Inhibitors were considered two very different things. Inhibitors had a very specific role, and that's to prevent the harm of both humans and Nikkes. They played extremely fast and loose with this. In Chapter 14, Marian was unable to shoot at Nikkes despite her Nymph being gone. D and K directly associate this with the Inhibitor. For the moment, let's ignore that Marian is a heretic that was rebuilt from the ground up by the Raptures, so this shouldn't even apply in the first place. The idea here is the Nymph and the Inhibitor are exclusive. This is literally the only time where that is the case. In all other moments, the Inhibitor is a function that comes from the Nymph itself. Cecile directly confirms this in Chapter 21.
Code pertaining to behavior which the Nymph implants into a Nikke's brain is its own entity. The prime directive in this code dictates that Nikkes cannot harm a human.
What this means is Nymph injects a set of instructions into the Nikke's brain that it must follow. What we call the inhibitor is one of these instructions. In other words, the Nymph is the reason why the inhibitor exists. Now, the question is, if the Nymph is gone, do these instructions still exist? The evidence points to no. In Chapter 21, Cecile states getting rid of Nymph would give Nikkes freedom of choice. And this is echoed across multiple chapters. In Chapter 16, Crow associates Nikke's freedom and oppression with Nymph. In Chapter 17, the Pioneer Squad states getting rid of Nymph would in fact give Nikkes the freedom of choice. In Chapter 24, Uni demonstrates she is unable to outright kill Suyin. She then uses the Vophouse bullet to get rid of her Nymph, and then states she feels free, and can kill both Suyin and the commander. She demonstrated this further by shooting Suyin in the head, and she would have died if Mihara did not get in the way. Final example. In the same chapter, Crow shot Uni and counters in the head, stating that she killed them. This goes into a whole fiasco where Crow and the commander gets into a brawl, but then Rappy shows up to take down Crow. Initially, it was thought that Crow overpowered her Nymph to do whatever she wanted, but Rappy set the record straight by stating,
"It doesn't matter how much mental fortitude you have. If you want to be free from the Nymph, then your inhibitor needs to be deactivated. There's no way around that."
Basically, what Rappy is saying here is Crow can never fully defy her Nymph as long as the inhibitor exists. This is better explained by Cecile in Chapter 21, where she states that even though the inhibitor is wildly inconsistent, it has always been successful in stopping a Nikke from killing another human.
The code pertaining to behavior which the Nymph implants into a Nikke's brain is its own entity. The prime directive in this code dictates that Nikkes cannot harm a human. You've seen for yourself how inconsistent that directive is. Exactly. Some can't lay a finger on a human, whereas others can go as far as firing suppression bullets at them. Of course, none of them can kill a human outright, but nevertheless, there's a wide range according to each individual Nikke.
Rappy is more or less stating this also applies to other Nikkes. So overall, it can be reasonably assumed that even though the inhibitor does exist on its own, it cannot enforce its own rules. So when a Nikke wants to defy this code, it is the Nymph that stops this. Again, that makes the Marion scenario boldly stupid, but that's not even the worst plot hole we've ever had. But I just said the inhibitor has always been successful. This is actually a lie. The New Year, New Sword event. Won't lie, I do like this event for what it is, but sweet lord is it so badly written. Let's just cut to the chase. In the final portion of the event, Rose, who is Scarlet's sister, pretty much goes on a killing spree, and she even manages to kill both humans and a single Nikke. Scarlet asks Rose if this was due to a mind switch, but this is seemingly not the case. Instead, Rose explained that she put on a blindfold and started wildly attacking. This is her full explanation.
I covered my eyes with this. When I did the deed, I simply imagined that they were raptures. As you can see, it proved effective.
Is that even possible?
Apparently so. Interesting, isn't it? Our inhibitors prevent us from harming humans. So I wanted to test if I tricked myself into believing they weren't human, if I could do it. Turns out, it worked. Thanks to this red cloth. When I was looking through it, I imagined that what I was looking at was the glowing red core of a rapture. I just kept telling myself anything that moved was a rapture. I must say, I'm surprised at how effective it was.
So to make it clear, there is no indication whatsoever that Rose ever suffered a mind switch. Instead, she just found a loophole in the code. More specifically, you just had to believe that what you are attacking is not a human or a Nikke. This was so effective that she accidentally killed someone she didn't mean to kill. Now, I'm not going to lie to you and say this is a plot hole. It's not. For as far as I can see, this does not contradict anything other than Cecile and Rappy's statements, but that can be hand-waved away by saying neither of them knew about Rose. The actual problem with this is it opens Pandora's box. Rose straight up states that all you have to do is believe you're not attacking humans, and then the Nikkes can attack humans. And the method can be as simple as closing your eyes and blindly attacking everywhere. This isn't just a loophole, it's a fucking meme. You mean to tell me no other Nikkes other than Rose has ever thought of just blindly firing at humans before? This is way worse than Crow, who had to use ricochet techniques to cheat her Nymph. By this logic, she just had to close her eyes and spin around and fire everywhere. This also makes Query the most dangerous Nikke on the art because she's legally blind. So fun fact, I brought this up to other lore nerds on the day this event dropped. They were just as shocked by how dumb this is as I was. But some hours later, I got some pushback. The argument presented can be dumbed down to, Nikke's writing is bad, so it ruins the enjoyment by poking holes in it. It's better to just not think about it too much. Now, I've been in this community enough to know this wasn't an ignorant take. To explain this, let's step away from Nymph and talk about something simpler, power scaling. Power scaling is overcomplicated by power scaling YouTubers, but it actually is pretty simple. If you say this character beat this character, congratulations, you just power scaled. You can get into the nitty-gritty details, but that's the basics. Writers use power scaling all the time. It's how stakes are made. Nikke is no different. Unfortunately, power scaling is misused just as much as Nymphs. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go over everything, but I'll go over what I deem as the most obvious. At least it was so obvious that the community constantly called it out. In the Red Ash event, we have the Goddess Squad and Cinderella. Lilith, who is deemed as the strongest Nikke ever, stated that Cinderella could possibly be even stronger than she is. When Cinderella became corrupted, Lilith was so convinced that they would lose that she literally carried the entire squad on her back and ran away from her. And this stunt strained herself so much that she decreased her own lifespan. So fast forward to part 2 of this event. Red Hood abandons the squad and Lilith is not available, and Anichiro is on a rampage. She beats up Snow White, Rapunzel, Dorothy, and Scarlet. Red Hood comes back, and she is able to convincingly 1v1 Anichiro. Once the Goddess Squad got back on their feet, they defeat Anichiro pretty handily.
We can't even beat her 5 against 1? We should be ashamed of ourselves. We're the Goddess Squad. Failure is not an option.
Is that all you got? That's her weak point. I'm going in. Didn't you say only barbarians fight hand to hand? I make an exception for monsters.
Watch out! Incoming!
I'll hold it off.
So, you finally learned how to raise your voice, did you?
Thanks to a certain someone.
glass slippers are no more. Party's over.
This convinced the super large majority of the community that Red Hood was at least as strong as Anichiro, and Lilith was just wrong. But the story wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense if Lilith was factually incorrect, since she damn near killed herself to save her own squad. This was finally clarified in Cinderella's event, Old Tales, where Abe tells Cinderella that going up against the goddess squad alone amounted to suicide, which can only mean yes, Lilith was entirely incorrect. This fixes the absurdity of Red Ash and makes it so Red Hood and Cinderella aren't like dozens of times stronger than the others. However, this retroactively breaks the stakes of that story and makes Lilith look paranoid at best and an idiot at worst, since her overreaction may have cost humanity their only chance to reclaim the surface. Personally, the only thing I can think of that goes against my point is Anichiro was fighting suboptimally, as she could have bombed everyone from a long distance, and it was by choice to fight in close combat. But I would argue this doesn't matter, since both Red Hood and Snow White were able to tag her with their weapons, and both Scarlet and Dorothy were able to reach her while she was occupied. This only would have become significantly easier with Lilith. Now, I never actually seen someone argue against this, other than the usual who cares or it doesn't matter. This is just admitting that the story is full of inexplainable stuff that shows how disorganized the writing is. It set up rules only to break them all the time. If I listed out all of the inconsistencies with Nikke's established world, this video would be over an hour long. So I wholeheartedly understand the well-meaning intention behind just ignoring it. I love writing as a hobby, so I know how to love a story despite its flaws. But I know many who feel they would like the story significantly less if they were able to see these issues. And it's probably the reason why the community as a whole are so against scrutinizing the story openly. There was a time when I said Nikke's story is better than Ghost Frontline. I still stand by what I said during that time. If I was asked that now, I would say it depends on what you're looking for. Ghost Frontline's story is better written with much more consistency. Once you get past the first 7 chapters, it's a lot harder to poke holes at it than it is with Nikke. But it's bogged down so heavily with details that it's notorious for being confusing to follow. I know many people who just gave up on Ghost Frontline's story because of how much of a slow burn it is. Too many terms to remember, too many characters to keep track of, too many plot threads. And in later chapters, the plot itself becomes so bloated, and it's impossible for the writers to give everything the screen time it deserves. So plot threads are mysteriously dropped, or worse yet, things are suddenly resolved without much fanfare. So yes, Ghost Frontline's story does have its share of problems, and the majority of those problems happen because it's so hard to stay consistent. Nikke just doesn't have this problem because it doesn't really worry about the logistics. They want to tell great stories. If you see these stories in isolation, they're fantastic and often emotional. And this is the context needed whenever I say Nikke's story is better than Ghost Frontline. But it's undoubtable that the story is willing to break its own logic if it means the storytelling is more entertaining for the player. And if something is too lore-breaking, they're willing to rely on retcons to fix it. Here's the thing though, Ghost Frontline's problem is a good problem to have, because it means there is a degree, a standard, that is set for itself. You want writers who are well-researched and organized. Nikke's problem is a bad problem to have, because it's an open admittance that Nikke's writers are flying by the seat of their pants. This is actually a big reason why I hate predicting or theorizing what can happen next in Nikke's story, because Nikke just doesn't care about his own rules. But if you treat Nikke's events like a popcorn flick on a Friday night, it's hard to deny how entertaining they are. But if you put even an ounce of brainpower in scrutinizing Nikke's writing, it can get bad. But let's move away from that topic and talk about something that one would consider the elephant in the room. as a disclaimer, this isn't an issue for me at all. But it is an issue that plenty of people have brought up in the past and even today. So I feel it would be disingenuous if I didn't bring it up here in this video. I first need to talk about a literary term called bathos. The Oxford Dictionary states bathos is an effect of anticlimax, created by an unintentional lapse in the mood from the sublime to the trivial or ridiculous. In my opinion, this is needlessly wordy, so I'll simplify it. Bathos basically means the story primes the reader to evoke an emotion, but something ruins it. This is often done in a comedy, but when it's used in any other situation, it's usually a mistake. For better or worse, Nikke is filled with bathos, thanks to his dedication to fan service. There was a post on Twitter I saw before of a Frontline veteran who was attempting to get into Nikke, and he made a couple of posts. The first one stating he was dissatisfied with the story due to the blatantly sexual designs of the characters. Typical stuff. Then comes the second tweet that states, "Imagine this scene, but RO is butt-ass naked. That's what Nikke feels like to me." This is clearly hyperbolic, but I understand the sentiment used here. Again, I personally don't see this as a problem, but I also am just as willing to admit that I am overall desensitized to overtly sexual designs. I don't doubt that for a second. Bathos is a real and constant problem in Nikke, especially when a community praises the story so much that it can interest potential players. It's not like the writing team and artists don't know what they're doing either, because they also know how to play it completely straight without something ruining the moment. Chapter 0 and Overzone are very honest at their attempts to tug at your heartstrings, but every other attempt has the story asking you to take the scene seriously while asking you to get your jollies off at the same time. To me, the most blatant sign of bathos is in the Old Tales event, where Cinderella lost all of her friends, and she is forced to fight the queen alone. So after all of that buildup and emotional weight, there is an animation between Cinderella and the queen. Yet the animation spends so much time doing close-ups on Cinderella's assets. If we are completely honest with ourselves, this is indefensible. Now, it's an entirely different story if we as a community see this as a problem. I know I don't. But speaking from a purely objective standpoint, there is no reason for Nikke to do this when the story wants to be taken seriously. Compare this to Ghost Frontline, where the serious moments are played straight 100% of the time. Yet we are still all horny motherfuckers over there too. Just ignore Nikita, because holy shit, how does that outfit even work? Now, I feel like if you reach this point, you might have forgotten that I love Nikke. I'm incredibly ride or die with this game. Writing a story is hard, especially if it's a story that isn't supposed to end anytime soon. So the one hope I have is you all can see that I love Nikke's story enough to take the time to talk about it. Whether you agree with my critique or not, I also appreciate that you chose to listen to me yap about it. But even if you disagree, I at the very least hope you are all entertained.